It's been 3 years since you've last seen how the Alola region was doing. After becoming the champion of Alola, you became a bit bored with your title, and soon decided to go visit the other regions. Arriving on the boat from Kalos, you noticed Howley City looking very barren. Walking away from your seat and stepping outside of the boat, the buildings loomed over you like titans. You waved to the sailor as he steered back to Kalos to drop off the other passengers. The atmosphere of the island was now more gloomier than the usual happy appearance. As you walked deeper into the city, no people or Pokémon could be seen. You decided to go to the Howley Outskirts lab in Ike Town to see if anyone you knew was there. You knocked a couple of times on Professor Kukui's door, but no one answered. Walking over to the other side of the lab, you could see little to no light. You tried to make out what was inside. A broken and drained aquarium, a static TV, and paper scattered everywhere. You walked over back to the front door and noticed that the door was unlocked. Entering inside the room, you decided to check around the living space. The basement was still lit, aside from the flickering of the lamps. His screens had been shut down completely. His water tank had been destroyed, with the love disc nowhere to be seen. His research papers were left burnt, crumpled, or torn. The professor wasn't here, but you didn't know where else he could have been. Walking away from the house, you decided to go check on Ike Town to see if it was as grim as the place you once called relaxing. Ike Town was in a very poor state. With the roofs of the houses that had been burnt along with the boarded windows, this cheery place was now abandoned. You didn't need to knock on the doors since you guessed that no one was there. However, the places you did want to visit were the Ruins of Conflict and Hollow's home. The doors to the home were locked, so you couldn't enter. So instead, you looked inside the windows. There was a huge light coming from above. There must have been a big hole on the roof. The chairs and plants were knocked over, but what still remained was the throne. But why? Opened and torn books were also on the ground, along with the knocked over shelves. You still wondered what has happened while you were gone. Walking away from the dreaded home, you walked over to the dark shades of the trees. The Ruins of Conflict lay there. Nothing has changed when you walked from stairway to stairway until you arrived to the bridge. It had been broken once again, but by whom? You looked down into the ravine as there lay broken pieces of wood streaming away or stuck on the jagged rocks. You grimaced at the rushing water and checked to see if your ride pager was still working. Thankfully it did, and you called on Charizard to see to the other islands. Melee was a barren population. Akala was like Melee, but more Pokemon were seen. They seemed so scared. Ula had been pouring like mad. As the storm from Po Town traveled over to the other side, Pony had the most damage. The altar was destroyed, and Seafolk Village plummeted to the sea. The next island you wanted to visit was the one that had the darkest history. What happened to it? Flying over to the Aether Paradise, half of the platform had been destroyed, and there were ashed craters. Landing on the other side of the platform, the Charizard left as you walked inside. Unlike the other places where they seemed to have been left behind, this place was inhabited, but not with the living. There had been fallen employees that were trying to escape from something, with petrified expressions. You wondered if anyone here was even alive. There were echoes of falling mechanical building parts to be heard every minute as you walked to the elevator. It was surprisingly still functional. You decided to check the conservation area and the secret labs. Up into the conservation area, the place was still lit by the glass ceiling, but the windows were somehow smashed. The trees that filled the place were now cut clean, burnt, or broken. The water that was endlessly pumping had now made a sudden halt. This place was once another daycare for mistreated Pokémon, but now it has turned into a demolished mess. Recollecting thoughts of the happy Pokémon, how joyful they were. How joyful they must have felt to have a new home, but now that had been taken away. Back to the elevator to go down to the darkest part of the paradise. Marching on through the hallway of Lab A and B, you could hear slight mutters that you've noticed were in Lab 8, the lab where Type Null was first created. The door wouldn't budge, strangely enough. It was a sliding door. Must have been controlled by something, you thought. You knocked on the door. There was no response at first. You knocked a second time. You heard someone's familiar voice. "Get away!" they shouted. It was the voice of the Aether President, Gladian. You tell him it was only you. He only opened the door slightly so that you could only see his eye. "Why are you here? Didn't they tell you?" You were confused on what they meant by they, so you shook your head. He opened the door fully to let you in, and immediately slammed it shut once you've entered. The walls of the room were covered in research, graphs, and other sorts of information on the walls. But what has he been doing here? You asked what has happened to Alola as he glared behind him. "The Ultra Beasts, they came back. We tried to fend them off, but there were too many. You see, without your presence, we're basically doomed." His breathing was rapid. It wasn't going to calm down anytime soon. You apologized for not getting the information, and then asked where the other islanders were. "Lily was called to evacuate the citizens, but not everyone survived." He looked traumatized, hands clenching his forehead with a strong grip. You then sat next to him and asked her what happened when the Ultra Beasts appeared. "The beasts, they all came one by one out of the wormholes, breaking everything in their path. You may be wondering what happened to Silvally. It didn't make it out of the blasts, and sadly plummeted deeper into the facility." His voice was shaking as he continued on with the explanation. You didn't notice before, but his attitude and attire has changed drastically. His defenses were completely down, letting all of the things he blocked seep into his mind like a disease spreading through his body. He was desperate to fix everything that had recently occurred. His clothes were more torn up than usual, with scratches, cuts, and burn marks showing through every ripped fabric. He stood up, his left hand shaking more violently than ever as he placed it on your shoulder. He calmed down his breathing for a few seconds and looked at you with his lifeless eyes. "I've answered your questions. Now, will you answer mine?" Gladian glared at you. His grip on your shoulder tightened as you hesitantly nodded. "Where have you been for the past 3 years, when everyone here needed you the most?" He looked insanely angry, yet somber, as you stared at him with frightened eyes. You apologized repetitively about your actions. You didn't know this would have happened. "You apologize now, and you think that's going to reverse all of this?" He pinned you against the wall as you started crying. "You don't care about any of us, do you? All you care about is you and your goals. I thought we could trust you. I thought I could trust you." He tried getting out of his grip, screaming for help, even if there was no one there. "I guess I was wrong, wasn't I?" You were ripped from his clutch as he dashed out of the room with fear flowing through your body. You could hear him down the halls walking slowly towards you.
You think I'm the only one here? You better think again.
You quickly pressed the number to get away from this place. You saw him as the platform raised up to the mid-level. He stared daggers into your soul. You felt sorry for them, that you left them behind. A roar could be heard from outside the paradise as your eyes lit up with despair. It was the sunshine that cleared even the baddest weather. But this time, he was the storm cloud that warned you of something horrid.
Gladian, are you there?
Lily's been worried about you! Howard called to him while entering. You couldn't stop the machine. You couldn't stop the machine from its tracks, so you had to show yourself to his presence. You stepped forth cautiously as the lift went down to its next user. He walked where he could fully see you, as his face quickly changed to his surprised expression. You finally came back. He stepped forward with open arms, with tears in his eyes. I thought they had taken you. He must have been talking about the Ultra Beasts. The noise of the conveyor had come to a stop, as Gladian had looked at both of you in disinterest. Oh, Gladian, there you were. I was just talking to a friend of ours. Hal then smiled at him. His ally replied with a glare at you.
Friend. Would a friend leave you behind? Would a friend just go off without telling you anything? Would a friend leave everyone in danger?
Hal was shocked at his response and looked at you. You wouldn't do that, right? That's you. He tried explaining to him that this was all just a big misunderstanding.
Lies! That's all you ever say. I was wrong.
We aren't friends.
But we're definitely enemies.
Gladian walked closer to you, but Hal intervened. Wait. Hold on. You left for 3 years without telling us? Without letting us have anyone to fall back on? You're such a horrible friend. Your heart torn to pieces. You never meant for this to happen. You didn't know there would be consequences. You stood there with nothing else to say. You were just a motionless husk of what you used to be.